Hello, hope you're doing great. Today I added to the biology playlist a new biology video talking about the menstrual cycle. This is the second video talking about the menstrual cycle. So please guys, make sure you check the link of the first video in the description below. And because learning never peaks, please leave me your comments, questions, feedback in the comments below. In this video, we will be talking about the positive and the negative feedback during the menstrual cycle in a very simplified way. To start with, the menstrual cycle has an average of 28 days, and during this time the body or the female body will be preparing itself for pregnancy. In case no pregnancy, then the cycle will start over again. As we can see below, the midpoint of the 28 days is day 14, where we have an ovulation, where the oocyte is going to leave the ovary and go to the oviduct. Now, from day 0 to day 14, we have the first phase, which is the follicular phase or the pre-ovulation, because it happens before ovulation, and it has the name follicular phase because the follicle will be growing. And from 14 till 28, we have the second phase, which is the luteal phase or the post-ovulation, because it is after ovulation. Luteal because the yellow body will be developing. As we can see that the 28 is not fixed. It could be plus 8 days or minus 8 days. And this would be simply normal. And the reason for this extra 8 days or missing 8 days is actually the follicular phase. The follicular phase is not fixed 14 days. It could be a little bit shorter, a little bit longer. And that's what causes the menstrual cycle to extend or to decrease. While the luteal phase is actually a fixed phase. Essential hormones in the menstrual cycle. Please guys, go check the previous video. The link is in the description below because it contains detailed explanation about the endocrine glands and the endocrine hormones that are involved or play a role in the menstrual cycle. Now in this video, I'm just going to quickly remind you of these hormones. More details are put in the previous video, so please check it. GnRH is the gonadotropin-releasing hormone produced by the hypothalamus, which is found or located in the brain, and it's actually part of the nervous system, but it has cells that have an endocrine function. GnRH is going to trigger the anterior pituitary to produce two hormones, FSH and LH. FSH and LH are gonadotropin hormones, and you can see the name gonadotropin releasing hormone because it causes the release of the gonadotropin hormones, which are FSH and LH. FSH is a follicle stimulating hormone. Its main role is in the follicular phase from 0 to 14. Remember, it could be slightly bigger or slightly less because it's not fixed 14 days. And what does it cause? Just as the name indicates, it's going to stimulate the growth or the development of the follicle until we have the mature follicle before ovulation. So a small reminder, a follicle is actually epithelial cells that are found around the oocyte. LH, luteinizing hormone, it plays a role in almost all the menstrual cycle. It aids the development of the follicle, so it's found at the end of the follicular phase, or it plays a role at the end of the follicular phase. It also triggers ovulation, which happens on day 14, and it has an important role in the luteal phase, which is the one responsible of changing the rupture follicle into the yellow body. Now, FSH and LH produced by the anterior pituitary have the receptors on the ovary or the cells inside the ovary, and they stimulate the production of two hormones, estrogen and progesterone, which are steroid ovarian hormone. So we can see GnRH, FSH, LH, estrogen and progesterone are the main essential hormones in the menstrual cycle. Actually, there is one more hormone which is inhibin, but I'm not going to talk about it in this video. I promise there will be a third video about the menstrual cycle. It's going to contain detailed information just after this video. It's worth mentioning that estrogen and progesterone are actually the real source for the timing of the menstrual cycle, and they control the timing of the menstrual cycle through a feedback mechanism. It's called feedback mechanism because, as we said in the previous video, hypothalamus producing GnRH will stimulate the anterior pituitary to produce FSH and LH, which will control the secretion of estrogen and progesterone by the ovary. And what we need to know and what we will be explaining in this video is that estrogen and progesterone that are the product of the stimulus of the hypothalamus and the anterior pituitary will also control the anterior pituitary and the hypothalamus. That's what is known as the feedback mechanism. And there are two types of feedback mechanism: positive feedback mechanism and negative feedback mechanism. What is a negative feedback? A negative feedback is when the input and the output move in opposite direction. Actually, the output will be a counteracting response to that of the input. And think about of the output as a certain hormone. So if the amount of this hormone was decreasing, then the negative feedback is going to cause its increase. Or if this hormone was increasing, then the negative feedback is going to cause its decrease. Why do we have this? We have this because we need to maintain homeostasis. So negative feedback, which are found a lot in our body, are super important for maintaining homeostasis. And when we talk about the homeostasis, it's worth mentioning that homeostasis is not a given fixed amount of something. It's actually a change, a range. It could be represented as a wave. So amount of a certain hormone is increasing, and in order for this increase not to go beyond the homeostasis level, we're going to have something that's going to cause its decrease. Or if a certain hormone was decreasing, in order not to decrease below homeostasis level, we're going to have it increased by a negative feedback. So negative feedback are super important to maintain homeostasis of the body. So that's why it's something known as dynamic stability. So we're always keeping the body in a stable condition, but this condition is not a fixed number. It's actually in dynamics, increasing, decreasing, increasing, decreasing, to maintain this stable homeostatic range. Positive feedback, however, are when the input and the output move in the same direction. The output actually comes to intensify and amplify the input. So if the input was causing an increase of this hormone, then the positive feedback is going to cause a further additional increase. If the input was causing a decrease, then a positive feedback is going to cause a further decrease. Since we're talking about more increase, more decrease, then obviously that we're not maintaining homeostasis anymore. And that's why positive feedbacks are very rare in our body. And when they happen, the result will be a great accomplishment. So they only happen to accomplish a certain thing. Since we're talking about the menstrual cycle, there are two important positive feedbacks: ovulation and the labor. So we can see the hypothalamus on the top, below it the anterior pituitary, and next to it we're going to see the ovary. I'm going to talk about the changes that happens during the follicular phase from day 0 to day 14. I want you to pay attention. I'm going to talk about 3 feedbacks that happen. One at the beginning of the follicular phase during the first week, one at the middle of the follicular phase during the second week, and one at the end of the follicular phase. So it all starts when the hypothalamus secretes GnRH that will bind to the receptors on the anterior pituitary and stimulate the secretion of FSH. FSH released by the anterior pituitary into blood, they will bind to receptors on the cavitary follicle inside the ovary, so inducing the cavitary follicle to complete developing and to start secreting estrogen. So this actually happens over here at the beginning of the follicular phase, and it will start secreting a little amount of estrogen. Little amount of estrogen in blood, they're going to cause the first feedback, and it's going to be a negative feedback. Since estrogen is low and negative feedback works just the opposite, so it's going to increase FSH, aiming to increase estrogen. So if I'm looking at a graph, I'm going to see a small rise of FSH. It's not a big rise, it's just a small rise at the beginning. So in presence of FSH, the cavitary follicle will complete its developing, and we're going to reach the mid of the follicular phase, where the cavitary follicle had changed to a mature follicle or to a Gravian follicle. This Gravian follicle will secrete more estrogen, so we will end up having moderate amount of estrogen, and moderate amount of estrogen in blood, they're going to cause the second feedback. You can see moderate, the arrow is higher, just to show you that more estrogen is being secreted at this point. Moderate estrogen will cause another feedback, but this time, since estrogen is high, the negative feedback is going to aim to decrease it. That's why it's going to have or inhibit the secretion of FSH. So what happens is that the moderate estrogen will bind to the receptors on the anterior pituitary and the hypothalamus, decreasing the release of GnRH and decreasing the release of anterior pituitary hormone. And this step is super important because I don't want all the developing follicle to become Gravian or mature follicle. So when FSH decrease, all the follicles who were developing and were not yet a Gravian follicle, they're going to die. Only the mature follicle is going to survive because it has more receptor to FSH, so it can deal with the little amount of FSH being secreted, and it can complete its developing. That's why we end up having one Gravian follicle that will undergo ovulation later on. So this Gravian follicle will complete secretion of estrogen. So estrogen at the end of the follicular phase, we reached here the end of the follicular phase, it is going actually to cause high amount of estrogen. So this is over here, the Gravian follicle at day 13, just before, it's going to secrete high estrogen. This high estrogen is going to cause a positive feedback. High estrogen, positive feedback, so it's going to induce more GnRH released by the hypothalamus, and more FSH and LH. So we're going to see a peak of FSH and a peak of LH happening at day 13 before ovulation, and because of the peak of LH, we're going to have ovulation. So if I'm going to sum this up, at the beginning of the follicular phase over here, I had little amount of estrogen that caused a negative feedback, increasing FSH, causing the cavitary to further develop, and it changed to a Gravian. Gravian at the mid of the follicular phase will produce moderate amount of estrogen that would cause a negative feedback on the hypothalamus and the pituitary, decreasing FSH. So all the follicles will die except for the mature follicle that will complete its developing, further increasing the amount of estrogen produced, and the peak of our high amount of estrogen at the end of the follicular phase around day 13 is going to cause a positive feedback leading to ovulation. During ovulation, oocyte 2 released will be oocyte 2 blocked at metaphase 2, while the oocyte in the follicles before ovulation were actually oocyte 1 blocked at prophase 1. Okay, so when ovulation takes place, the ruptured follicle will remain inside the ovary, while oocyte 2 blocked at metaphase 2 will be released into the oviduct or the fallopian tube. And if fertilization doesn't take place, then it will degenerate as an oocyte 2 blocked at metaphase 2, while in case of fertilization, while the sperm is entering oocyte 2, it will complete its meiosis 2, resulting in oocyte and the second polar body, and the oocyte will directly differentiate into the ovum, and the male and the female pronuclei unite together, forming the zygote, and the zygote starts its first mitotic division. Now, In this slide, I'm going to talk about the feedbacks that happen during the luteal phase, which is from day 14 till day 28. Remember what was said previously, luteal phase is a fixed phase. So what happens is that when the gravine follicle rupture, so the amount of FSH and LH, they're going to decrease. LH being secreted in steady little amount will cause the change of the yellow body, of the rupture follicle into the yellow body. So it will cause the change of the rupture follicle into the yellow body. The yellow body will be produced in the mid of the luteal phase around day 21. This yellow body over here will secrete estrogen and progesterone. Remember, estrogen was secreted earlier during the follicular phase, while progesterone is only secreted during the luteal phase. So high progesterone in blood in addition to high estrogen, they're going to cause a feedback, and it's going to be a negative feedback, and this negative feedback is going to affect the anterior pituitary and the hypothalamus, decreasing the secretion of FSH and LH. So no more FSH and LH are going to be secreted, and this is super important in case of pregnancy. So in case pregnancy took place, we don't want the cycle to start again, and we don't want the endometrium to rupture, otherwise we will lose the baby. So no contractions of the uterus and no endometrium sloughing should take place, and this is maintained by high estrogen and progesterone that cause a negative feedback on the anterior pituitary and on the causing a decrease in the secretion of FSH and LH. Now, if fertilization doesn't take place, so the yellow body will survive till the end of the luteal phase, till the end of day 28. So at day 28, the yellow body will degenerate and it becomes a white body or corpus albicans. When the yellow body degenerates, estrogen and progesterone won't be secreted, so the negative feedback won't exist anymore. So FSH can be secreted again, and by the secretion of FSH, we will start a new cycle. Now, in case of pregnancy, estrogen and progesterone should be kept in high amount to keep the negative feedback, to keep the FSH and LH from being secreted. So what happens in case of pregnancy, the yellow body or the corpus luteum will remain alive for 3 months. And what happens after this, it would degenerate, but the placenta will start secreting progesterone. So progesterone will be kept in high amount, keeping the negative feedback, preventing the cycle from happening over again. That's why pregnant women don't have their period, because it is inhibited by negative feedback. The first 3 months it's inhibited because of the corpus luteum, and later it will be inhibited by progesterone secreted by the placenta. So this slide shows the graphs, gonadotropin, which are the anterior pituitary hormones at the top, and ovarian hormones, estrogen and progesterone are below. So it all starts during, if you pay attention, we have the follicular phase at the beginning over here. Here we have day 14 ovulation, and here we have the luteal phase. So FSH secreted by the anterior pituitary cause the developing of the follicles, and we start having a small amount of estrogen secreted. This small amount of estrogen secreted will cause a negative feedback, increasing FSH at the beginning. Then as the follicle complete its developing, we're going to have a moderate amount of estrogen over here. This moderate amount of estrogen over here is going to cause a negative feedback, decreasing FSH, and only the cavitary follicle will complete developing, causing a peak of estrogen. This peak of estrogen is going to cause a positive feedback, this time increasing or causing a peak of LH and FSH. The peak of LH is what triggers ovulation, and then the LH is going to permit or stimulate the change of the rupture follicle to the yellow body. The yellow body will start secreting estrogen and progesterone. High estrogen and progesterone, they are going to inhibit FSH and LH, and only when the yellow body becomes a white body, estrogen and progesterone decrease and FSH and LH increase at the end of the cycle, allowing a new cycle to start. So if you pay attention, LH is almost steady with just one peak triggering ovulation. If you pay attention, FSH is high at the beginning, and then it decreases because of the negative feedback of moderate amount of estrogen, and then it increases back again. Estrogen has two peaks. At the end of the follicular phase and at the luteal phase, because estrogen is produced by the theca interna and the granulosa of the Gravian follicle, and also it is secreted by the corpus luteum, while progesterone is only produced by the corpus luteum. To sum up, we started this video talking about the essential hormones in the menstrual cycle, and as I said previously, please make sure you check the first video about the menstrual cycle, and then make sure to check the third video that will be recorded and uploaded soon. So we said that the hypothalamus secretes GnRH. GnRH will stimulate the anterior pituitary to produce FSH and LH, and the ovary will also produce two main hormones, estrogen and progesterone. And as I said earlier, that estrogen and progesterone are actually those important hormones that are responsible for the timing of the menstrual cycle. And this was obviously discussed in this video. When estrogen peak at the end of the follicular phase, it causes a positive feedback, which causes a peak of LH, which causes ovulation at day 14. So ovulation happens at day 14 because of a peak of estrogen that causes a positive feedback, leading to a peak of LH. Also, at the end of the luteal phase, when the corpus luteum degenerates, when it changes from the yellow body to the white body, it will not secrete estrogen and progesterone, so the amount of estrogen and progesterone in blood, they're going to decrease, and when they decrease, the negative feedback caused by high estrogen and progesterone will be absent. Due to the absence of the negative feedback, FSH will start to be secreted again. This will promote the developing of the follicle and will sign the beginning of the new cycle. So the new cycle happens when the yellow body degenerates, stopping the release of estrogen and progesterone, stopping the negative feedback. So the beginning of the new cycle depends on the absence of the negative feedback, and ovulation depends on a positive feedback caused by a peak of estrogen that causes a peak of LH. So this was my simplified video. Hope it was beneficial. Thank you so much. Have a happy day, and I want you to be happy because happiness is a mindset, and if it is to be, it's up to me. Have a happy day. Thank you.